welcome to Mr. B's bedtime story. Today's story is called The Tiny Transistor. Once upon a time, there was a tiny NPN transistor. He was a bit lazy and would only switch on when the voltage across him was 0.7 volts. He had a cousin called MOSFET who was even lazier and would only switch on at 2 volts. But this story isn't about him, so frankly, who cares? Tiny Transistor loved playing with his best buddy, LED. At 0.7 volts, Tiny Transistor would let current pass through him, and LED would light up brightly, making everyone happy. One day, at school, Tiny Transistor and LED were learning a new game. It was called Transistor Circuits. Tiny Transistor liked the sound of that game because he was a little bit arrogant. In this game, 2 resistors were put next to each other in series and became a potential divider. The bottom resistor was always kind, and whenever it had a big voltage, Tiny Transistor would have a big voltage too, and LED would shine. But the top resistor was a jerk. It would try and steal volts away from the bottom resistor, and in doing so, would leave Tiny Transistor with less than 0.7 volts, leaving him switched off and utterly miserable. The next day, an electronic engineer spotted this game and thought, "That would be useful in my automatic streetlight." So he stole it, which is morally wrong. Nevertheless, Tiny Transistor was so excited. He and his best friend, LED, were going to light up the world. Of course, it was really just a small section of Princess Street, but let's not spoil it for them. The electronic engineer placed LDR as the bottom resistor because she was kind, but mainly because that's how this circuit works. However, he placed variable resistor as the top resistor. Literally nobody liked variable resistor because he was a selfish poo-face. It was daytime, and nobody needed Tiny Transistor or LED. As the light level rose, LDR became more and more frightened of variable resistor, and her resistance decreased. This allowed variable resistor to take more and more volts from her, said variable resistor, because he was a selfish poo-face. Then the sun set. People began panicking and screaming. Desperate to find any source of light, they were setting their houses on fire. One man even threw himself into the core of a nuclear reactor. True story. Would they ever see light again? Had Tiny Transistor failed? And then something magical, and by magical I mean scientific, happened. As the light level fell, LDR found her courage, and her resistance increased. And as her resistance increased, she started taking more and more volts from variable resistor. "No!" He shouted. "Yes!" She shouted. "Maybe!" shouted Tiny Transistor, because he didn't know if he was going to turn on or not. Eventually, there was 0.7 volts across LDR, and therefore 0.7 volts across Tiny Transistor. As he had done so many times before, Tiny Transistor switched on, and the current passed through him to allow LED to shine brightly once more. The people danced and sang songs as streetlights came on. Some say they were singing for Tiny Transistor. Most say it was Hogmanay. Regardless, Tiny Transistor continued to help light up that small section of Princes Street every night until he stopped working and was replaced with a newer model. The end. That story was called Tiny Transistor, and it was written by Mr. B. And remember, kids, if you ever find a tiny transistor, well, then you've probably broken something quite expensive. Be less clumsy. Good night.